Part 61. She Always Loves to Sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 617. Chapter 602 Almost went berserk. Ji Yuncha slowly opened his eyes, his expression gradually becoming serious. How about it? She seemed to be in a trance for a moment, looked at Li Ju, and muttered, Lin Yan, is from the Shemeng. Ji Yuncha glanced at Mr. Yun, who fainted on the ground. Lin Yan used the opportunity to cure Yun Rong as a bait to get the Yun family to take the bait and willingly commit the kidnapping case, and promised to cover up the tracks of the people of the Shemeng afterwards. And Ji Yuncha paused and did not continue. There was a flash of shock and strangeness in his eyes, and he secretly glanced at Li Ju. Li Ju, what? Ji Yuncha took a deep breath. Moreover, it was not accidental that Lin Yan found the Yun family. Yun Xingyi once. She paused, as if it was difficult to speak. Ningfeng frowned. Seventh sister, what's wrong with you? She spoke hesitantly, but it was not like her usual temperament at all. Ji Yuncha sighed. He once participated in the experiment of the Cha League. The air suddenly fell into silence. Seventh sister, are you kidding me? Ningfeng's tongue was tangled. Lu Qingran could clearly feel his trembling with the hand that was holding his. Yes, trembling. Ningfeng had the hair on his back standing on end, and his palms were covered in cold sweat. That experiment was an unspeakable nightmare for each of them. Even if it has been a long time, I still feel somewhat uncomfortable when I mention that experiment. Compared to Ningfeng, Baimu's reaction was not very big, but he frowned, his face changed slightly, and he murmured, how could? Suddenly, the siblings suddenly realized that Li Ju was the one who was most affected by the experiment. The two of them looked back at the same time. Li Ju looked normal on the surface, but the clenched fists hanging by her sides revealed her inner unrest at the moment. The moment Ji Yuncha said the word experiment, a violent look suddenly gathered in her eyes, and the aura around her body was cold and sinister, cold and killing. When she was on the verge of losing control, a pair of large, generous hands wrapped around her fist. Li Ju was stunned and looked sideways, falling into those light gray eyes. Just for a moment, those strong and compelling murderous intentions were all restrained and returned to normal. Qi Jinkai's eyes were deep and his tone was worried. 9. Li Ju shook his head at him, it's okay. However, she didn't act as if nothing was wrong. At this moment, Bai Yuxiu frowned and thought for a moment, then suddenly asked, the experiment you are talking about, is the seed project from more than 10 years ago. Ji Yuncha nodded slightly. He immediately hissed and looked at Lu Qingran blankly, both seeing shock and astonishment in the other's eyes. Seed Program. The human experiment on the group of people with special abilities that once caused a sensation in the world. Due to its bloody, cruel, and dehumanizing content, the impact was very bad. The Association of People with Special Abilities at that time banned it and destroyed all experimental data and materials. He was wanted all over the world and was wanted to kill him. The Experimental Alliance Forces. With the destruction of the Kameng, this seed plan has become history forever, but why is it being mentioned again now? Looking at the reactions of Li Ju and others, Bai Yuxiu narrowed his eyes slightly and remembered a rumor that had been circulating in the association for a long time. It is rumored that the 9 gods of the second supervision team and her team members are all survivors of the seed project. When they heard about it before, they only regarded it as a joke. The survival rate of experimental subjects who have experienced the seed project is 0.1%. Even if they survive, they will become fools due to severe mental damage. It was impossible for anyone to survive intact. But at present, it seems that this rumor is not groundless. Li Ju, continue. Ji Yuncha coughed lightly, glanced at the others, and said hesitantly, not only that, the 5 major families in the imperial capital were all participants in that experiment. The 5 major families in imperial capital are the Li family, the Qi family, the Bai family, the Lu family and the Yun family. This news is really exciting. If there was silence just now, it is deathly silence now. The floor tiles under Li Ju's feet cracked. The wall behind him also had tiny cracks. Everyone clearly felt the ground shaking. Li Ju's mental power was on the verge of losing control. Not good. Ji Yuncha shouted, "Hurry dash." She was about to shout to run, but this place couldn't bear the power of Li Ju's violent mental energy, and it would collapse. The secret prison of the second supervisory team could not be shaken even by a full blow from an SS-level superpower, but now, it could not withstand Li Ju's loss of mental control. Ji Yuncha cursed in his heart. Oops. If Li Ju's mental power is really out of control, in serious cases it may even destroy the entire base. This has not happened before. She once not only destroyed the base, but also seriously injured all of them. In the end, it was the president himself who knocked her out. Countless experiences in the past told them that Li Ju was usually as strong as a pervert, and when she was in a violent state, she was simply in mode, killing Buddhas when Buddhas were blocking her, and killing gods when she was blocking gods. Just when Ji Yuncha wanted to take out a silver needle to stun Li Ju just in case, Qi Jinkai beside her suddenly made a move, quickly stepped forward to take Li Ju into his arms, and gently comforted him, "Jeju, calm." A shocking scene occurred. Li Ju gradually calmed down in Qi Jinkai's arms. The mental energy that had almost gone out of control suddenly disappeared. The whole person calmed down and returned to normal. Ji Yuncha took back the silver needle that glowed coldly. Bai Muo put down the ice blade that instantly condensed. Ningfeng released his finger that was holding the trigger. The three of them stared at the scene in front of them dumbfounded, as if they had seen a ghost. Three voices sounded in surprise at the same time. "How did you do it?" "Just, quite suddenly." End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 618. Chapter 603. Second brother. Qi Jinkai did not answer, but hugged Li Ju quietly, his eyes lowered, and the emotions in his eyes could not be seen clearly. When the person in his arms gradually calmed down, he picked up Li Ju by the waist and took Li Ju directly out of the dark prison. Bai Muo and Bai Yuxiu looked at each other and immediately followed. Ningfeng put the gun back and looked at the Yun family members who were stunned by Li Ju's leaked mental power. He rolled his eyes helplessly. "What should I do now?" Ji Yuncha glanced at her calmly and said, "She's not going to die. It's more important for the boss to go and see her first." As she spoke, she took a long step, crossed the Union in front of her, and left calmly. Ningfeng twitched the corner of his mouth, turned his head and looked at Lu Qinggran, and followed him. Qi Jinkai carried Li Ju back to the room and gently put her on the bed. He wanted to get up and cover her with a quilt, but he felt someone tugging on his sleeve. He lowered his gaze. Li Ju's hand was firmly holding his sleeve and refused to let go, as if he was nervous. Qi Jinkai frowned, feeling very uneasy about her current state, so he sat on the edge of the bed, held her hand, and said in a clear voice, "Jeju, what's wrong?" The consequence of almost losing control of his mental power is that Li Ju is now in a state of unconsciousness, and his eyes are blank and dazed, as if he has lost his soul. "Second brother." "What?" Qi Jinkai saw her lips move, but didn't hear what she was saying, so he subconsciously moved closer. "Second brother." This time he heard it very clearly. "Who is this?" Qi Jinkai frowned. This was the first time he heard this title from Li Ju. To be able to shout it out unconsciously, this person must be very important to her. Thinking of this, Qi Jinkai suddenly felt jealous. Li Ju's past that he had not been involved in had someone to go through with her. There were also people to bear the memories and pain that he could not relate to. Although he was a little unreasonable, he was very jealous and at the same time blamed himself for not getting to know Li Ju earlier. "Boss." Bai Muo hurriedly followed, looking at Li Ju lying there, who was in a normal mood, and subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. Xiao. Bai Yuxiu followed her closely, fearing that something was wrong with her. He grabbed her wrist and looked up and down, his face full of worry. He glanced at Qi Jinkai and Li Ju and said, "Third brother is here, nothing will happen." Bai Mui's eyes were full of Li Ju at this moment. After giving him a perfunctory sentence, he stepped forward to observe Li Ju's condition and asked cautiously, "Boss, are you okay?" Li Ju looked at her blankly, opened and closed his red lips, and repeated the two words, "Second brother." Bai Mui was shocked and froze, staring at Li Ju in disbelief. Boss, who are you calling?" "Second brother." With a loud bang, Bai Mui's mind was confused. Qi Jinkai, who was on the side, saw that her expression was not right either. He frowned even more and asked in a deep voice, "Who is that?" Bai Mui was stunned for a moment and subconsciously wanted to answer, but the words came to her lips but she couldn't say them because she found that she didn't know how to introduce him to others. In the end, she could only forcefully twitch the corners of her lips, draw a bitter arc, and explain, "She is thinking about the past again." Just at this time, Ji Yunchu also arrived. "Seventh sister, come and take a look, the boss is crazy again." Ji Yunchu's eyes flashed and he sighed, she knew it would be like this. She stepped forward and pushed Qi Jinkai and Bai Mui away, leaned down in front of Li Ju, stretched out 3 fingers and shook them. The other person's eyes remained motionless and there was no response. Ji Yunchu clicked his tongue irritably and complained in a low voice, "I'm really looking for trouble for myself. It's all my fault for being so mean-mouthed just now. You all go out and leave her to me." Ji Yunchu straightened up and spoke stiffly. Qi Jinkai did not move. "Master Qi, this is not her first time, don't worry, I'm very good at it." Qi Jinkai's eyes dimmed and he struggled for a moment. He finally looked at Li Ju and retreated in silence. Everyone also went out with him, the door was closed, and in an instant, she and Li Ju were the only 2 people left in the room. Outside the door, Qi Jinkai's face was so gloomy that he could drip water. He raised his eyes to look at Bai Mui and said in a cold tone, "What's going on with Jeju, tell me." The name that I had been thinking about Li Yan's mouth, and Ji Yunchu said, "It's not the first time, and that seed plan, what's going on?" Bai Yuxiu silently stood in front of Bai Mui, covering part of his sight, and said, "Third brother, calm down first, don't scare Xiao." After all, Qi Jinkai's anger is not something ordinary people can bear. Bai Mui's eyes warmed up, he gently tugged on his clothes, and whispered, "Brother, it's okay." She stood up from behind Bai Yuxiu, met Qi Jinkai's gaze without showing any signs of weakness, and smiled slightly, "Actually, the boss should tell you this himself. But now." She turned around and looked at the closed bedroom door and sighed softly, "It's a long story. I can only tell you first that you don't have to worry. This is a normal situation." "Is this still normal?" "Boss, she had been seriously injured once before, and her spirit was damaged." Qi Jinkai's pupils shrank sharply. For a person with superpowers, the spiritual realm is equivalent to a second heart, and its importance is self-evident. Injury to the mental realm, ranging from loss of consciousness to life-threatening. So since then, her situation has been very unstable. She was always prone to violence at the beginning, and her powers were out of control from time to time. With her strength, losing control once is enough to destroy the entire association. Bai Mui sighed, "This is why the base of our second team is built in the mountains. Do you really think that we are independent and unsocial?" This was a decision made by Zhongqing for the safety of everyone in the association, and Li Ju himself agreed. "Then there's no way," Qi Jinkai's voice was filled with panic. "Seventh sister has been trying to find a way, but it can only temporarily delay her condition, but she cannot be cured. We are also very puzzled about this. Maybe it's because of the boss's special constitution." When she said the last sentence, she paused deliberately and concealed part of the pronunciation, but Chi Jinkai was too concerned about Li Ju to notice this. He was really panicked and anxious. When Bai Muo saw this, he immediately said, "But third brother, you don't have to worry, there will always be a way." "Teacher, ahem, the president has been secretly talking to me all these years. We have used resources to treat the boss, and there has been a lot of improvement." Chi Jinkai turned a deaf ear to her words, turned to Bai Yuxiu and said, "Yuxiu, get Miles back right away." Bai Yuxiu, "But third brother, Miles said some time ago that he can't be separated for the time being. Let him stop all research and come back immediately." "Yes. I'm a little upset tonight. I didn't do well in the exam. The balance in my bank card is getting smaller and smaller. Even my most beloved dog is seriously ill and is about to die. So I drank to drown my worries. Now I feel like vomiting after drinking, equals." Smiley face. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 619. Chapter 604. He Yao calls. The bedroom door was opened. Ji Yunchu wiped the sweat from his forehead, made an okay gesture and said, "No problem." Chi Jinkai rushed in immediately and saw Li Ju lying there and sleeping quietly, with a peaceful face. "Ji Yunchu, she has been busy all day and night, let her have a good sleep." Chi Jinkai hummed, closed the door gently, and stepped out. In the living room downstairs, Ningfeng and Lu Qinggran had been sitting there for a long time, and they wisely did not go up to disturb them. Seeing them coming down, Ningfeng raised his eyebrows, put down the coffee in his hand, and asked, "How is it?" "It's nothing serious, just take a rest for a while." Ningfeng showed an expected smile. "I knew that with seventh sister here, there would be no problem." Ji Yunchu, who had just come down the stairs, happened to hear this and immediately rolled his eyes. "Stop flattering." After a few people took their seats, the atmosphere fell into a brief silence. Everyone looked at each other in private, and finally all focused on Chi Jinkai. "Li Ju is fine. His expression is no longer as anxious as before, but he still has an indifferent look on his face, making it difficult to guess his emotions. If Mr. Chi wants to ask anything, just ask him." Ji Yunchu looked at his appearance and suddenly said, "I will choose what I can say. If you can't say it, you won't say one more word." Chi Jinkai's eyes moved slightly, a dark color flashed across his eyes, and he asked in a deep voice, "What did you see in Mr. Yun's memory?" Ji Yunchu narrowed his eyes and thought deeply for a moment, but did not hide anything from him. "I saw that the experiment back then was carried out by the 5 major families." Ningfeng and Bai Muo subconsciously sat upright. "Anything else?" Ji Yunchu paused. "Yun Xingyi is getting old, and some of his memories are blurred, and I can't see clearly. But what is certain is that the 5 major families seem to have fallen out with the Cha League in the end, and revealed the seed plan, which caused the association to and other forces' attention." Bai Yuxiu grasped the key point. "You mean, if it weren't for the internal strife between the 5 major families and the Cha League, the association would never have discovered their experiments? How can anything be perfect in this world?" Ji Yunchu looked at him. "These memories are Yun Xingyi's personal perspective. It is normal to have questions. After all, if you have not participated in the past, you will never be able to truly restore the truth." "Really?" Chi Jinkai asked again, "Have you seen the memory of my old man or Mr. Li?" Ji Yunchu frowned, thought about it carefully, and shook his head. "Yun Xingyi's relationship with Mr. Qi and Mr. Li is average, and he doesn't usually interact with them much." She suddenly stopped, swallowed, and glanced at him subconsciously. "Wait a moment. Since Chi Jinkai is Zhongqing's junior brother, he joined the association earlier than all of them. However, judging from his reaction after hearing these things, he doesn't look like someone who knows the inside story at all. The vice president of Tang Tang Association, a team of Q gods, would he not know anything about what his father has done? It is somewhat illogical. If he really doesn't know, it's because someone deliberately hid it from him and didn't want him to know. Seventh sister. Seeing Ji Yunshu suddenly silent, Bai Muya called her, "Why are you so stunned?" Ji Yunshu suddenly came back to his senses, "It's nothing." At this moment, Ningfeng suddenly shouted, "Lao San." Everyone was startled by him, especially Lu Qingran. He was sitting next to Ningfeng and bore the brunt of the shock. He couldn't help but cover his chest and said with lingering fear, "Feng, what's wrong? You were so startled." Ningfeng ignored him, pulled off his supernatural bracelet and spread it out in front of everyone. He pointed at the flashing red light on it with a trembling voice and said, "Old, old, third, old. It's the communication from her." Bai Muo's pupils trembled, and he quickly connected the bracelet. "Lao San, is that you?" No one answered there. First there was a faint sound of electricity and friction, mixed with the sound of wind and panicked footsteps. "Appears to be running away. The third child." Bai Muo frowned and his tone became uncertain. After a while, it seemed that a safe place was found over there. The sound of wind and footsteps stopped. The bracelet was held in someone's hand. After 2 seconds of silence, a weak female voice came, "Hello. It's Chi Mao Yi." Everyone was startled. Qi Jinkai immediately said to Chen Sheng, "Why Wei?" Over there, Chi Mao Yi was hiding in a dark and damp tree hole, surrounded by strange rustling sounds. She gritted her teeth and huddled in place, trying not to make a sound of fear. Even so, she was still because she couldn't help but tremble with fear. When she heard Qi Jinkai's voice, she almost collapsed on the spot. "Third brother." Chi Mao Yi's eyes suddenly turned red, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked extremely pitiful and aggrieved, "Come and save me." Before Qi Jinkai could answer her, Ji Yunshu immediately asked, "Where are you now? Why is the third child's bracelet with you?" Hearing that it was a strange woman, Chi Mao Yi did not panic. She realized that Qi Jinkai was not the only one there, but they should all be trustworthy. She glanced next to her. Lim Wei was in another part of the tree hole, squatting next to He Yao to bandage her wounds. He Yao's face was pale due to excessive blood loss, and there was a layer of sweat on her forehead. Her clothes were stained with blood and sweat. Soaked and embarrassed. "Just hold on, it'll be fine soon." Lim Wei gritted his teeth and tried to make his movements gentler. Chi Mao Yi watched, wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, regained her composure, and explained the current situation in detail. "Ayao was injured. We were chased by that group of people and hid in a big tree. In the cave, I don't know where it is exactly. From being kidnapped to waking up and then being chased, her mind was very confused along the way and she couldn't figure out where she was." At this moment, He Yao pursed her lips and struggled to sit up despite the severe pain. She said to her in a weak voice, "Sister Wai Wei, let me do it." Chi Mao Yi quickly handed over the bracelet. He Yao coughed twice, and after a while she managed to speak, "Seventh sister." "This is, He Yao." Lu Qingran and others present were immediately confused. "Ah, Feng, is this a Yao?" Lu Qingran looked at Ningfeng with her eyes widened, and asked in disbelief. Ningfeng hummed in a neutral tone. "So she is. Our people." Even though it was unconscionable to say such things at this time, Lu Qingran couldn't help but complain in her heart, "Your second team is really everywhere." The complaint only lasted a moment, because after that, he immediately concentrated on listening to He Yao's words. Ji Yunshu's face was particularly ugly. Just by hearing He Yao's voice, she knew that she was seriously injured, so she hurriedly asked, "How are you?" It's okay, cough, I can't die. On the other side, Chi Mao Ei could be heard sobbing faintly again. Where is the fourth child? Fourth brother went to lure the people from the Chalig. We have lost contact with him now. Hearing this, Ji Yunsha raised his head and looked at each other with the same solemn expressions. Don't hang up, I'll have someone locate you right away. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 620. Chapter 605, Destination, Shemeng. He Yao hung up the call and inadvertently touched the wound with her movements, and couldn't help but let out a slight hiss. Chi Mao Ei looked at her nervously, are you okay? Fine. He Yao looked up and looked outside and asked, how is the situation outside? Lim Wei said in a deep voice, I don't know, we don't dare to go out easily. The people outside were searching very hard, and they had no way to protect themselves. If they were discovered, there would be only one consequence. Then what should we do now? Chi Mao Ei's voice was filled with tears, we can't hide here forever. A Yao's injuries still need to be treated. I'm fine. He Yao looked at her, with a smile on her pale face, and said, Sister Wei, our superpowers physiques are dozens of times stronger than ordinary people, so this little injury won't matter. Chi Mao Ei was not comforted. Instead, she almost cried, do you think I'm stupid? Those people didn't use ordinary weapons, so how could the injuries they caused be ordinary injuries? As she spoke, her eyes slowly moved down and fell on He Yao's right arm. The cloth used for simple bandage was already soaked with blood, and it seemed that the trend could not be stopped. If it continued to flow like this, sooner or later she would die. I'm really fine. He Yao smiled helplessly, unable to bear the intense concern in their eyes, so she could only say, it's just a little troublesome. It needs time to heal. Don't worry. Even if she is not a healer, if it is an ordinary wound, she can heal it with mental power alone, but the time will be very slow. Lim Wei, otherwise, I can go out and have a look. He Yao immediately refused sternly, no. Her face darkened, she looked at the two of them and said, you can't go out. They are looking for you. If you go out, you will fall into a trap. But you can't just sit back and wait for death. This is not a safe hiding place at all. Sooner or later, the group of people will find you, and you will still be captured by them, and the result will be no different. He Yao sighed, leaned back slowly, found a more comfortable position, and said, wait. If she had not been injured, she might have been able to fight her way out of Lim Wei and Chi Mao Ei. In this situation, all they could do was wait. She believed that Ji Yunsha would definitely come to save them. No, I don't agree. Ji Yunsha's attitude was firm, if there is any further delay, the situation of Lao San and others will be even more dangerous. Bai Yuxiu frowned, but Dr. Ji, that's the headquarters of the Chalig. Even if the first team and the second team are all dispatched, they may not be able to get people out. I do not think so. Bai Muo thought for a moment and denied Bai Yuxiu's statement. The other party looked over in surprise. She smiled back and said, brother, you may not know that we are very familiar with the headquarters of the Chalig. Bai Yuxiu frowned tightly, how could you? Ningfeng continued what Bai Muo said, because 4 years ago, we completely destroyed the place. With mockery in his eyes, he sneered, since they dare to come back, we don't mind destroying it again. But this is still a bit risky, Bai Yu said. This is inconsistent with their usual style of always being fully prepared in doing things. There are too many variables in a rash attack, and no one can guarantee that the best results can be obtained with the minimum loss. I'm sorry, Mr. Bai, our second team's style has always been so casual. If we have to be prepared for everything, we may lose the best opportunity. Ji Yunsha smiled and looked at Qi Jinkai, third master, I think this matter is a private matter of our second team, and you have nothing to do with it. Why don't you stay at the base and look after the boss, and leave the rescue to me, give it to us. Before Chi Jinkai could reply, a cold voice came from behind, keep him alone. Everyone was startled and turned around. Li Ju was slowly coming down the stairs, holding his forehead, his face not very pretty. Ji Yunxia stood up immediately and said in shock, didn't I give you a sleeping needle? How could she still wake up? Li Ju glanced at her coldly. The meaning was very clear. I will settle the score with you later. She glanced at the others and said, notice, everyone is dispatched. The destination is Shimeng. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfei. Chapter 621. Chapter 606 Chi Jinkai. The entire second team was dispatched, and Chi Jinkai and others followed. There was a silence on the road. Ji Yunxia sat the farthest away. If the space was not limited, she could move 8 feet away on the spot. She leaned close to Baimwu, glanced at Li Ju, and whispered in a low voice, my sleeping needle has never failed, and she woke up. Baimwu listened to her depressed and tangled tone with helpless eyes and sighed, you know she doesn't like it, but you still dare to use it. Have you forgotten why your laboratory was struck by lightning last time? Ji Yunxia said quietly, because of the serious consequences last time, I increased the dose this time, but she is still fine. Baimwu's mouth twitched, seventh sister. I guess it's not just your laboratory that was hacked this time. Ji Yunxia suddenly became even more depressed, with thick low pressure lingering around his body, and he glared at Li Ju with a resentful expression. It was obviously for her own good, and he wanted her to rest more to calm down her mental strength, but in the end, this guy didn't appreciate it at all. Li Ju sat there in silence, pinching his eyebrows irritably. The aura around him was cold and compelling, and his eyes were more like a piece of ice. It's not that the increased dose of sleeping needles had no effect on her, she just used her mental power to forcefully resist the effects of the drug. Now it seemed like there were two forces in her body that were constantly fighting and fighting. It was chaos, causing her emotions and mental power to fall apart. Very unstable. But she had to stay awake. The things Ji Yunxia read from Mr. Yun's memory were like a thread that connected all the clues in her mind. She thought that she might have guessed the other party's true intention of doing these things recently. Can you still persist? Chi Jinkai saw that her face looked very bad, and thought she was weak and a little airsick. He patted her back distressedly and said, why don't you go back and rest, I'll do it. Li Ju waved his hand, his expression still ugly, no need. This time, she must come in person. Lao Shi, check the current location of Lao San. Ningfeng immediately followed the instructions. After a while, he raised his head and showed the location to everyone, saying, it's right here, but only the third brother and the fourth brother's bracelet still have no response. Baimwu looked at the flashing red dots above, combined with the surrounding environment, and frowned, why do I feel, this place looks so familiar. Ji Yunxia raised his eyebrows when he heard this, observed it carefully, and suddenly said in a deep voice, isn't this the headquarters of the Cha League? Headquarters? Lu Qinggran looked at them in surprise, shouldn't the headquarters of the Cha League be in Continent S? Because of this, they initially chose to locate the headquarters of Organization J in Continent S. The purpose was to better monitor the activities in Continent S to prevent the Cha League from coming back. Ji Yunxia nodded, his eyes fixed on the position, and he muttered, well, it is indeed in Continent S, but this is their initial base camp. Lu Qinggran didn't understand, what do you mean? Lao Lu, come and explain it to them. Baimwu moved his gaze away from his position and looked at the confused Lu Qinggran and Bai Yuxiu, who had a frown on his face. He sighed, opened his lips and said slowly, well, this may be a bit long to say. We and the Shimeng, the grievances are not as deep as a day or two. Actually, we are all survivors of that experiment. She paused, ignoring their shocked expressions, and continued, "We were still young at that time, and we don't know exactly when we were captured. We only remember that the base camp there was very big, and there were many mountains and deep forests around it. There are experimental bases everywhere, there is no way to escape." Ahem. Li Ju coughed twice and glanced at her lightly, the meaning was obvious. Bimwew immediately picked out the key points and spoke to them much faster. This base camp was the place where the seed plan was first implemented. Later, the teacher led people to carry it out, and the Shaman League re-established another base camp in S continent. After learning about the seed plan, Zhongqing immediately sent people to investigate the location of the Cha League's headquarters, and led the association to encircle and destroy the Cha League's lair. Several of them, including Li Ju, were also rescued by Zhongqing at that time. It's just that many years have passed, and because they were still young and had vague memories, they didn't recognize it for a while. This turned out to be the birthplace of their childhood nightmares. After hearing Bimwew's words, Qi Jinkai's eyes flickered, and he suddenly remembered some old memories. He turned his head and looked at Li Ju, and asked hesitantly, "Juju, how old were you when you came to the association?" Li Ju still had a headache at this time, so she didn't think deeply about what was wrong with his tone when he said this, and replied, 6 years old. "Were you brought back by Zhongqing?" At that time, were you emotionally unstable and repulsive to everyone?" Li Ju, "Yeah. Isn't this normal? Anyone who has just escaped from A and comes to another strange place in the blink of an eye would be surprised if he doesn't have a stress reaction. Has Zhongqing ever thought of finding you a playmate of the same age?" It was just that later on, because of someone's bad and lack of cooperation, the matter fell through. Qi Jinkai. Great, now he knows how stupid he was back then. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 622. Chapter 607. Prepare for the worst. Seeing his silence, Li Ju finally noticed something was wrong and glanced at him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, I suddenly remembered some old things." Some old things that made his intestines turn green with regret. Qi Jinkai never expected that the person Zhongqing shamelessly begged him to take care of was actually Li Ju. And he refused in a very stupid manner. If there is a time magic in the world, he must go back and let he who is 17 or 18 years old know why the flowers are so red. But none. He can only be immersed in immense regret now, and has no intention of listening to anyone analyzing the battle plan. "Since you have been in this base camp before, do you still remember some details?" Ji Yuncha raised his eyebrows and looked at Bai Yuxiu. "For example?" "For example, there are some unattractive paths or secret passages in the base camp." Before Ji Yuncha could answer, Ningfeng scoffed at his whims. "Young Master Bai, are you dreaming? Let's not talk about the fact that we were just children at that time, and our mobility was infinitely close to zero. Let's just talk about us. As an experimental subject, do you think it is possible for the shaman to let us run around? This idea of yours is too stupid." Hiss. Before Ningfeng finished speaking, he took a sharp breath of air, his expression became distorted due to pain, and he quickly begged for mercy. "It hurts, it hurts. Sister. Let go." His ears were about to be ripped off. Bimwew snorted coldly and pinched his ears fiercely. The strength of her hands did not weaken at all because of his begging for mercy. She said word by word, "Ning, Feng. How many times have I told you not to be too big or too small? Bai Yuxiu is her nominal brother and can be considered his elder, but this guy is good. He has been acting strangely since they met. He really needs a lesson. I was wrong, I was wrong." Ningfeng suddenly broke free from Baimuo's clutches, immediately got up and hid behind Lu Qinggran, and said angrily, "Sister, who is your biological brother? How dare you protect that like this?" Baimuo smiled, "If you want to, I will sever ties with you right now." Ningfeng. What a cruel woman. Lu Qinggran was sandwiched between the two of them and coughed awkwardly, Xiao, stop arguing now, business is more important. Baimuo glanced at him coldly, "It's none of your business." He shut up. Ji Yunchu and Li Ju were watching the show with great interest. They looked at each other with amusement on their faces. There seems to be something wrong with the atmosphere between these four people. Something must have happened. In addition, when Ningfeng announced his relationship with Baimuo just now, Lu Qinggran and Bai Yuxiu were not surprised at all. They had obviously known about it for a long time. So they have made it clear? The corners of Li Ju's lips curved with an unknown meaning. She thought that according to Baimuo's temper, in order to maintain the relationship with Bai Yuxiu, she would not confess so quickly. After all, this girl's thoughts about someone are not pure. A certain Bai Yuxiu sighed helplessly, "Xiao Yu, I'm not angry." Baimuo, that won't work either. Bai Yuxiu noticed that the atmosphere was getting worse and worse, and everyone's eyes began to focus on him and Baimuo. He immediately cleared his throat and decisively changed the subject, "I was reckless just now, but the situation is unclear at the moment. We don't know how powerful the alliance is, so it may not be beneficial to have a head-on conflict." As soon as business was mentioned, everyone stopped joking and became more serious. Li Ju nodded, agreed with Bai Yuxiu's point of view, and said, "Well, so, we have to split up." Hearing this, Qi Jinkai, who had been distracted, moved his eyebrows slightly, and finally had some reaction to Li Ju's words, and asked, "How do we split up?" "Li Ju, you, me, and Lao Qi will attack head-on together and force the people behind the scenes out. As for Lao Lu and the others..." She smiled mysteriously, her eyes slightly cold, "Each of you will lead a group of people and disperse around the base camp to feign attacks at the same time. The louder the noise, the better. Do you understand?" Qi Jinkai smiled clearly, "To attack the east and attack the west, or to divert the tiger away from the mountain. In this way, we can not only find out the distribution of their strength, but also take the opportunity to save people." All. "But, boss, I still have a question," Baimuo suddenly spoke up. She pursed her lips, her eyes looked complicated for a moment, and asked, "Have you ever guessed who the person behind the scenes will be?" Li Ju was silent, lowering his gaze, unable to see the emotions in his eyes clearly. Of course she had guessed that the Shaman League was destroyed twice, and she thought there was no possibility of a revival. However, in the past 2 years, it has recovered its strength at an unimaginable speed, and spread its power silently. If it hadn't been for this time, if something happens to the two old men, they will not realize that they have been infiltrated by the Kameng. Furthermore, they know the secret past of the 5 major families and their ambition to restart the Seed Project. All these signs indicate that the person behind the series of events must be someone who knew about it back then. But most of the insiders back then had been secretly executed by the association, and the rest. Li Ju closed her eyes and didn't dare to think about it. The remaining insiders are all people who have deep cooperation with the association and know almost all the high-level secrets of the association. If the people behind the scenes are among them, the consequences will be disastrous. "Lao Qi, inform the teacher and prepare for the worst," she said solemnly. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 623. Chapter 608 Cooperation Again. There was no sound in the gloomy and damp basement. All the darkness and gloom slowly grew in the dark space. The surroundings seemed to be surging, but then fell silent in an instant. Amidst the eerie silence, a dull low cough suddenly came out, as if all the strength had been exhausted, and the voice was stained with blood and weakness. Lao Li, are you okay? Mr. Chi's own condition is not very good, but he still cares about Mr. Li as soon as possible. Fine. Mr. Li waved his hand. In the darkness, his face was so pale that there was no blood, but he was still holding on. Because they know that in this case, they must not show weakness first, otherwise they will give the other party more opportunities to take advantage of them. Oh, I never imagined that they have become so bold. Mr. Chi's tone was long, with deep helplessness and powerlessness. They were all old and could not change the mistakes they made when they were young. They could only watch it happen again. Humph, what can't people like them do? Mr. Li's face darkened, and he looked calm and confident. He is crazy, has no bottom line, and is shameless and obscene. Okay, stop scolding and think of a solution. Mr. Chi was a little helpless that he still had a fiery temper that had not changed after all these years but had become even worse. In order to prevent him from cursing and getting emotional and causing blood to surge up and hurt his body, that would be really bad. Mr. Li snorted coldly, "What can I do? We are tied like rice dumplings now, what can we do?" "Hey, I don't know how Ajin and Wei are doing." Mr. Chi couldn't help but worry. That stinky girl and boy have always been trouble-free. It is easy to impulsively anger the people of Kameng, and he Yao girl. If he is injured, how can he explain to An Yan? If you care, it will cause chaos, Mr. Li said. They were the ones the Kameng wanted to catch, and they brought Chi Saijin and others back just because they could be used to threaten them, so there was no need to worry too much about the safety of Chi Mao Yi and others for the time being. Mr. Chi was stunned for a moment, then smiled, "That's right, it's better to worry about ourselves first." He lowered his head and glanced at the strong ropes tied around him, and couldn't help but sneer, "They are really relieved, they tied us here with simple ropes. Otherwise, we are not superpowers. How much effort are two dying old men worth?" Although the words are a bit ugly, they make sense. But that's not what Mr. Chi noticed at this time. "Lao Li, why do I feel that you are much more relaxed than when you were in the imperial capital?" he asked in confusion. Mr. Li was stunned for a moment, then raised his head. Even though his eyes were pitch black and he couldn't see anything, there was still a flash of relief in his eyes unconsciously. "You may not think it, but these years, I have been living a very miserable life. The secret has been in my heart for more than 20 years, and I can hardly breathe." He paused and said with a smile, "Now that I am locked up here, my life and death are unknown, but I feel a sense of relief as if a big stone has fallen to the ground." It was as if he could finally come to terms with the past. "That's the case," Mr. Chi sighed, "the seed project is all a mistake we have made. Although the ideal at the time was beautiful, after countless experiments, our purpose has long been lost in the increasingly crazy research. Modifying the human body is too crazy, and this kind of experiment really should not exist in the world. Whether it exists or not cannot be decided by two people." Just as the two old men were sighing, the cell where they were imprisoned suddenly became as bright as day. The sudden bright light was so dazzling that they subconsciously squinted their eyes. After gradually adapting to the light, their vision refocused. A slender figure stood not far away, pressing the switch on the wall with one hand, while looking at them with a slight smile, but the smile did not reach the bottom of his eyes. His eyes were as old as ever, without sadness or joy, which made people feel a sense of unspeakable palpitations. The visitor twitched the corners of his lips, and the silver half-mask covered most of his expression, making it impossible to see what he was thinking. Only a glimpse of it could be seen in the ruthless eyes that were exposed. He looked at the two old men and said in a gentle tone, "What do you think about it? Would you like to cooperate again like we did more than 20 years ago and create a new future with me?" He extended the invitation to the two of them politely and gracefully, with a gentle and harmless expression, as if he was really just discussing a simple cooperation with them. But there is no cooperation and it is based on violent coercion. You're dreaming. Mr. Lee snorted coldly, it makes me sick to cooperate with you. The man seemed to have heard something funny and couldn't restrain his laughter, ha 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 ha. Suddenly, he stopped, his unruffled eyes finally changed, and his tone became gloomy, I'm sorry, I'm afraid you have to cooperate with us even if you endure your nausea. It's not up to them. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 624. Chapter 609. Everyone was deceived. Loss, what on earth do you want to do? Loss smiled gently, of course it's a restart seed. But relying on the next person alone is limited, so we have to rely on the two old men. Mr. Chi said with a stern voice, absurd. Do you know the consequences of doing this? Of course, but... Loss's eyes narrowed slightly, and the light-colored broken hair on his forehead covered the expression under his eyes. He could only hear a soft whisper, everything is worth it. You're crazy, Mr. Lee couldn't help but yelled, your father suffered the consequences back then, didn't you learn a lesson from it? Of course. Luz raised his eyes, looked at the two of them with a slight smile, and said warmly, my father used the wrong method and was too eager for quick success, which led to failure, but I will not do it. I have patience and time, and I am more confident that I can restart the seed plan without being destroyed by the association. In the past few years, I have prepared too many things just in case. Please rest assured about this. Loss became more and more excited as he talked, and his eyes were already filled with a look of madness. You. Mr. Lee took a deep breath, you and your father are really the same thing. Ha 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 ha. Loss laughed twice, you are wrong. He and I are not the same people. At least, he would not be so crazy as to use his own son as an experimental subject. Loss didn't know what he thought of, and a sarcastic arc appeared at the corner of his mouth, but it was fleeting. Okay, this ends the reminiscing with you two. In order to express my sincerity, I wonder if I can invite you to visit the laboratory I have carefully prepared for you. Mr. Chi glanced at him coldly, do we still have the right to say no? Loss smiled and raised his hand to let people take them away. Two men with their faces covered and fully armed stepped forward to hold the two old men respectively, and then followed Ross out of the cell. Mr. Chi closed his eyes as if resigned to his fate, as if he had foreseen the next outcome. He sighed heavily in his heart and lamented that he had committed sin. At this moment, a voice as thin as a mosquito suddenly came from my ears, Grandpa. Mr. Chi opened his eyes suddenly, and saw his arm firmly held by his side. His eyes slowly moved up stiffly, and finally met a pair of familiar light golden eyes. He was wearing Kameng clothes, and his entire face was completely covered by black cloth, only his delicate and beautiful eyes were exposed, with a deep light shining at the bottom of his eyes. Seeing that he was stunned, Chi Saijin glanced around and shouted in a low voice. Only then did Mr. Chi finally react. Why is he here? The moment he saw Chi Saijin, Mr. Chi's first reaction was to breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he was safe and sound, but then his heart suddenly rose to his throat. Doesn't this brat know how dangerous it is for people pretending to be from the Kameng to come here? He is just fooling around. Mr. Chi's eyes suddenly turned cold, and he glared at him, like a silent condemnation, but because of the current situation, he could not make any other response to avoid being noticed. Of course Chi Saijin knew what Mr. Chi was angry about, but he remained indifferent, pretending that nothing had happened and asked him to follow Los. He narrowed his eyes. At present, it is impossible for him to rescue the two old men alone. It is better to wait and see what happens and see what Los is playing. God knows how shocked he felt when he sneaked back after separation from He Yao and others, and accidentally discovered that the mastermind behind the scenes was Los. Why is it him? Isn't he dead? How is it possible that you are still alive? Los, one of the experimental subjects of the SEED project. Same batch as them. He is the son of Luolin, the leader of the Cha League and the mastermind of the SEED project. Code name 11. Died during an extermination operation 15 years ago. But now, the dead man appeared in front of him alive and kicking. Chi Saijin was hiding in the dark, staring at Los. He would not admit his mistake. He knew this face even if it turned to ashes. He clenched his fists subconsciously, wanting to rush forward and kill him immediately. But he knew that this was impossible. He took a deep breath and slowly calmed down his mood while trying to contact the headquarters and Liju. The person who was supposed to be dead suddenly resurrected and was the mastermind behind everything. This incident was far beyond their expectations. He was careless. Liju was also careless. Everyone was deceived by Los. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 625. Chapter 610 Half-Beast Experimental Subject. However, Chi Saijin calmed down quickly. He knew not to be impulsive. After the Kameng was wiped out, the association searched everywhere for a long time and only gave up and left after confirming that there were no survivors. But Los became a fish that slipped through the net. Having escaped the association's screening for more than 10 years, what he planned was definitely more than what they guessed. The most urgent task is to rescue the two old men without alerting the enemy. At this moment, two members of the Cha League with their faces covered passed by him. Chi Saijin narrowed his eyes, thinking of his plan. His luck was very good. These two people were close to Los. Following him, he easily found the two old men. Now he only needed to rescue them while Los and others were not paying attention. However, the surrounding area was very heavily guarded, and because of the importance of the two old men to Los Angeles, the number of manpower arranged overtly and covertly in the vicinity had more than tripled, which was a bit tricky. Chi Saijin held up Mr. Chi, observing the surroundings calmly, and clicked his tongue slightly, feeling a little heavy. I don't know how long it will take for the boss side. Los led them through the long dark passage and came to the door of the laboratory. Through the verification through his pupils, the heavy door slowly moved to both sides, and everything inside was displayed in front of them. The next moment, after seeing the scene clearly, Chi Saijin clearly felt that Mr. Chi's whole body stiffened suddenly, and his hands began to tremble uncontrollably. He frowned and looked over, but then he was also stunned. The huge laboratory was dark. I don't know who pressed the switch. Suddenly it was as bright as day. There was a faint and unknown pungent smell in the air. Except for the sound of the instruments constantly operating, the silence was so heart-stopping. Directly in front of them, there was a row of glass containers that accommodated an adult. The containers were filled with transparent solutions, which showed a light emerald green under the snow-white light. And inside each container, there was floating a naked young child who was no more than 6 or 7 years old. Each of them was in a curled-up posture, as if they were fetuses in the womb. They had no idea where they were, and they were quiet. The ground fell asleep. Some of these children are missing arms, but have a pair of feathered wings on their backs, some have no legs, and their lower bodies are replaced by a long snake tail, and some have half of their faces covered with, the scales are terrifying, and the head does not resemble the shape of an ordinary person. They are all half animals. Looking at these experimental subjects, Mr. Chi's legs almost lost strength. If it weren't for Chi Saijin's support, he would have fallen to his knees. Not only him, Mr. Li was not much better either. His face was pale and bloodless, as if some bad memories come to mind. How was it? Surprise. Ross smiled and turned to look at them, and introduced them to them kindly and considerately. Although this place was destroyed back then, My good father had already anticipated this day, so he hid some of the facilities in advance. No, this is an advantage for me. I have not been idle in the past few years. I have searched everywhere for the manuscript of the plan. Emperor Tian paid off his hard work and finally let me find it. Therefore, I followed the contents of the manuscript and restored the experiment of 20 years ago step by step. Please take a look at it. If there is any omission, I hope you will criticize and correct me. Mr. Chi only glanced at it and then looked away, holding back his nausea, and asked, "Where did you get the manuscript?" They had clearly destroyed all records and data related to the experiment back then. You two don't need to worry about this. The smile on Los's face was flawless. Let's comment on my new seed plan first. I bother. Mr. Li finally couldn't help it and exploded, "This is a seed plan. You beast. The seed plan was ruined by perverts like you and your son." Los was indifferent, and the smile on his face did not diminish at all. "Mr. Li, you misunderstood. I only improved on the basis of my father's experiments. I prepared them exactly according to the level recorded in his manuscript. How could I ruin the seed plan, woolen cloth? You." Mr. Li couldn't help but wanted to rush up and give him a slap, but was restrained by the person behind him. Ross chuckled lightly and walked forward to look at him. The coldness in his eyes was chilling, but, since my father failed, I can't copy certain things, so I added my own ideas. Ignoring the raging anger in Mr. Li's eyes, he stood up and looked at the row of glass containers and said, "Now it seems that the effect is not bad. My darlings are about to mature." You. Mr. Li said you 3 times but you didn't come out. He was obviously mad. This beast. How dare he? I've been too busy these days, and the plot is stuck, so, I'm stuck again. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 626. Chapter 611 Seed Plan. Looking at the furious expressions of Mr. Chi and Mr. Li, Lo said contemptuously in his heart, "Old stubborn. There is no way to adapt at all." A few decades ago, the world was not developing as peacefully as it is now. Wars and conflicts were everywhere. Wars continued between different countries and regions. There were also many factions of superpowers secretly. There were many frictions, which eventually turned into violent conflicts, resulting in losses for both sides, heavy casualties, and a sharp decline in the number of superpowers. This is when the Seed Project emerged. Compared with ordinary people, the most significant difference between people with supernatural powers is that their spiritual realm is stimulated and their abilities are awakened. The strange stone is the only key to stimulating the spiritual realm. As for the strange stone, no one knows its origin. Only the few records handed down by ancestors in the world today mention it occasionally. It is said that more than 100 years ago, a group of troops broke into the uninhabited deep forest and accidentally discovered it. A mineral deposit, the ore mined from it is very special, and can give people who touch it have abilities that ordinary people don't have, which are called superpowers. Hence the name of the superpower. Over the next 100 years, countless superpowers who awakened their superpowers by chance worked hard to explore the secrets of the strange stones, but they all ended in failure. Gradually, everyone gave up and continued. However, when the number of superpowers decreased sharply due to fighting, this special group finally realized the crisis of extinction. Because they have special powers, they consider themselves different from ordinary people. This arrogance and conceit that has long been engraved in their bones have made them accustomed to being superior. They are not willing to accept the fate of destruction so calmly. So they created the Seed Project. According to common sense, the birth of a superpower must be inspired by strange stones, but this process is not 100% successful. The awakening rate is less than 40%, and the qualifications are uneven, which means that there will be fewer and fewer excellent superpowers, and eventually they will disappear. The Seed Project is an attempt to achieve superpower inheritance by studying the genes of superpowers, so that highly qualified superpowers can pass their talents on to the next generation through combination. The 5 major families are among the original executors of the Seed Plan. They are not superpowers, but they have deep interests involved with superpowers. In order to better study the structural differences between superpowers and ordinary people, the 5 major families readily agreed to join the Seed Project and sent the most powerful members of their families. Top Elite. The Seed Project lasted for a long time. By Mr. Lee's generation, it had been exactly 50 years. For a full 50 years, they had made no obvious progress. This made those who had been looking forward to this project gradually turn from hope to disappointment. In the end, no more illusions about this plan. However, there are always people who are not willing to accept that 50 years of hard work have been in vain, so they secretly use their twisted ideas to turn the original Seed Plan into a cruel and human experiment. They are crazy. They conducted human experiments on superpowers who volunteered as experimental subjects, and forced different superpowers onto the same superpower, which led to serious rejection and eventually caused many experimental subjects to explode and die. They also tried transferring the abilities of superpowers to ordinary people will naturally result in failure. Countless experimental subjects who died due to failed experiments were secretly buried and turned into dust and mud in the dark, lonely, and uninhabited valley. Although these people's actions were very secretive, they were still discovered by people from the 5 major families. They were very angry, but it was of no avail. They were just ordinary people, and their efforts to fight against those with supernatural powers were in vain. The people who participated in the experiment were all elites from the 5 major families, and their IQs and strategies were far beyond ordinary people. They pretended that nothing happened and continued to work. However, they secretly concealed it from the eyes of the group of people and secretly contacted the association at that time. Working together inside and outside, destroyed this dark experimental base in one fell swoop. The Seed Project also eventually died. But now, it has been revived again, used as a tool of cruelty, and continues to poison innocent people. But these old things are not within the scope of Los's consideration. He only wants to achieve his own goals, but on his own, his understanding of the Seed Plan is really limited. So, whether he uses soft or hard tools, he must get Mr. Lee and Mr. Chi to agree to assist. End of this chapter.